this is going to be our first podcast. This is exciting.
I'm excited.
I'm excited as well.
We'll
see how it goes.
Let's get started.
We'll see how we feel at the end of it. Although I realized that we don't actually have a podcast name.
No, we need one.
No, and that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because
how do you find us?
Exactly. Did you know that you can Google search podcast name and it will come up with a random name selection for you? Do you want to hear some?
I would love to.
Okay. So this was the first thing that I came up to. So Bright Brain.
Sounds like a toothpaste, kind of.
Yeah, kind of. Neurologypedia. I think if you add a pedia on the end of anything and put it on the internet, it works, but that's probably not great. Fresh Brain, Neurology Works. Optimum Brain, sounds like a supplement.
Mm-hmm.
EduBrain, Dr. Brain, Braincast, Neurology-ish, and my favorite that I saw. If this came from AI, I'm so impressed. Soul Brain.
I think I liked Neurology-ish the most, but I feel like it's not ish; it's neurology that we're doing.
Yeah.
So we'll have to keep working on that.
Well, yes, but. Speaking of that, what are we talking? Who are we and what are we talking about? Who are you?
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to my talk time. So I am Dr. Jeannie Cody. I am a neurologist based in Michigan. I work at a facility called Memorial Healthcare in Owosso, and I am obsessed with multiple sclerosis and have been from a very young age.
Really?
Yes. So when I was little, my mom had MS. She had symptoms that started when I was little. And so I used to go with her to drug talk dinners.
Really?
And I would give her shots because she couldn't reach the back behind her to do her shot.
How old were you when you did this?
I was like probably 10 when I went to my first dinner, and it was on Rebiff. And I remember raising my hand and asking questions to the moderator.
Really?
And I mean, obviously what we now know about MS is worlds advanced, but so even dating back to then, MS sort of touched my world. And while it wasn't her case that fully propelled me into a career in neurology, it definitely played a part. And then there were more patients that I met along the way that touched my heart in a way that, I dedicated my life to this field.
Wow.
I also have 3 kids, a dog, and a husband.
My answer is not nearly that good.
How about you? Who are you?
Well, I'm Rob Pace, Dr. Rob Pace. I am also a neurologist, also an MS neurologist. I got into MS accidentally, sort of because when I went into neurology, I sort of looking for the subspecialty that I wanted to go into, and I really liked chronic bad diseases. And I first wanted to go into neuro-oncology. And because I just like dealing with things that were very serious. But that is such a tough field, and I think I knew myself well enough to say that over time that was going to wear enough on me that...
That's a tough one.
Yeah. So I kind of veered off to MS, and when I was studying MS, or when I was doing my neurology residency, it was about the time where neurology was MS was exploding, and we were getting more and more and more treatments and more ability to do things. Sort of got to the point where we could actually start to play some offense against MS. So that kind of got me really excited about it, and brought me to where I am now. So, yeah.
Well, I am so pleased to be sitting across from you.
Well, likewise.
And doing this is going to be great.
It is going to be great. The neurology verse. Brain, Bright Brain, Soul Brain, Fresh Brain, neurology thing.
Nerve Soul, the myelin minute.
We'll work on it.
We'll work on it.
All right.
Suggestions welcome.
This is the first of hopefully many different podcasts. And from all of the probably millions of people that are listening to us right now, we would love to hear your thoughts on things that we can talk about. We love brains. We love neurology, and would be happy to talk about anything. We've thought about having a talk about things like MS, other neurological conditions, interesting cases that we've seen, interesting patients that we've seen. We want to talk about things that people are interested in, like neurological effects of marijuana, neurological effects of psychedelics, neurological effects of stress. But there are many, many things that we could talk about. So if there are topics that people want to hear about, we will get you information to contact us, get that to us, and we'll do our best to work on it.
Yeah, I think we would love to hear from you to help us know what it is you want to learn more about, and hopefully there's something useful taken away from each of these.
What should we talk about today?
So I feel like we should probably go to our roots and talk a bit about multiple sclerosis, just because that's our baby at the end of the day.
That's why you're here, Jeans. Good answer.
Well, thank you. I have to keep us on topic.
Somebody does.
So why don't we start with me telling you a story?
I love stories.
I love to tell stories.
This works out.
So let's start. Let's see. It's a cold, rainy day.
Ooh.
And the sun is setting, and there's a wind rustling through the trees.
Ooh.
And outside, there's a man, middle-aged, average weight, average height, and he's walking in the cold. And he's wearing boots, and it's raining, and it's starting to drizzle harder and harder. And he says, gosh, my foot feels cold and wet. I must have a hole in my shoe.
The old hole in the shoe.
Right? And he's walking home because it's been a long day. His day is done. He's exhausted. He's just got one more block to go, and he'll be home. And as he's walking, he notices the other foot starts to feel a little cold and wet. And he says, gosh, I better hurry. And he gets home. He takes off his boots, and his socks are dry. But that night, as he's sleeping, that coldness and that wet feeling starts slowly marching up those feet, up the ankles, up the legs. And by next morning, that's settling up into his thighs. And the legs start to feel a little bit heavy.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. The rain ended at least, and he thought, well, let me better get this evaluated.
Well.
And then he went to a neurologist.
Yeah, that's what we do. The things like this we really love to see new cases like this that can be, a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. As a neurologist, we're kind of a lot like electricians.
Yes.
In that we don't necessarily think about what is causing a symptom right away. We think about where can a symptom happen. Like if the lights go out in your room, and it's one light fixture, it's probably the light bulb that burnt out. If it's multiple light fixtures, it's somewhere between the lights and the switch. If it's your room and half the rooms in the house, it's probably a circuit. And if it's the whole house, you didn't pay the electricity bill. So our first thought is, what are the symptoms? Where are they? And how can that happen? What are the places in the nervous system that could actually happen?
And really from top to bottom. So I think of, that movie Tron where they're on those motorcycles and it's like bright lines
talking
everywhere.
About the 1980s?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, and they did a remake.
Yes, they did.
So when patients talk to me, that's what I see in my head is a racing light zipping through the whole neuroaxis. And I'm mapping these lights and I'm saying, where do they intersect? Are they working together? Are they unrelated to one another? But in my head, it's a Tron as people speak to me. And that's how I visualize where I think their problem is coming from.
That is how I am now going to visualize it forever.
Each symptom is a zipping light through the neuroaxis. And that's how I've been doing it this whole time.
Hey, now I'm seeing the zipping lights and the guy with the holes in his boots that has no holes in his boots. So when the 2 versus 1 thing is a big clue for us.
Yeah.
The brain is sort of oriented right to left. The right side of the brain controls the left side of the body for the most part, vice versa. But then all those fibers kind of meet in the middle and shoot down your spinal cord. And throughout all that space, it's a place where a small injury can cause symptoms to both sides of your body. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing symptoms that are climbing up his legs that could be something that's going on in the spinal cord. Yeah. It also could be something that's going on in nerves everywhere. So there's a fun condition called Guillain-Barré syndrome where people get ascending numbness and weakness. And I think this was a House episode once where They
I've never gotten a house episode right once in my life. Probably not even the MS episode.
They're all way more dramatic than they are in real life, because I remember seeing this and it was like, well, that's not that hard of a diagnosis. It's kind of, most medical students would probably get it. But ascending numbness and weakness starts in people's toes, starts to climb up proximally more towards their legs into their knees, and then can eventually involve their hands and feet. And it's something that's caused by your immune system damaging your nerves.
And a big clue for us is really the exam once that patient's in front of us, because you might say, well, how can you tell them apart? That sounds very similar. Both are going to give you ascending numbness and weakness.
Did you examine the boot guy?
So I did examine the boot guy.
What did you find?
And what I found when I tried to check his reflexes is he practically kicked me across the room.
Ooh.
No, it's okay. I didn't get kicked. I'm not a newbie at this. I know where to stand.
This isn't your first reflex rodeo.
Yeah, I haven't been kicked in years. So yeah, reflexes were what we call brisk or very kicky, as I describe it to patients.
Very kicky and brisk.
And that's a clue that we're not dealing with a nerve problem, that we're dealing with something in the central nervous system, and in this case, with the spinal cord.
Neurologists love reflex hammers. They seem like silly doctor toys.
No, it's my baby.
It is. So they are a big deal. You can break the nervous system into two parts. Sort of, there's the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous systems. The central being your brain and spine, the peripheral being all the nerves that come out your spine and go to your arms and legs and do all the stuff that your nerves do. So when you have an injury to the central nervous system, your reflexes will generally become brisk. Mm-hmm. They'll get jumpy, they'll get kicky. When you have an injury to the nerves, like that Guillain-Barré thing.
Or a pinched nerve.
Or or
carpal tunnel. Those aren't really nerve reflex in the hand, but yeah.
Those things will make your reflexes drop. Mm-hmm. So the reflex hammers are more than just funny things to do to people, although they are hilarious. Still, I doing that for years, I still always love watching people's knees jump. But
so in this case, it sounds like we know where we should look next to try to solve what is going on with this patient. Rob, what's your favorite way, or Dr. Rob, what is your favorite way of looking at the spine?
The only way to go was with an MRI, baby.
Yeah.
MRIs, there's lots of ways to take pictures of stuff. MRIs are the only way that we're able to see the soft tissues like the spinal cord, and that's what we need to see. Yeah. So lots of other specialties fool around with X-rays and CT scans, but we are straight to the magnet.
And that's a big reason why I chose to start with this story. Is this scenario comes up a lot, and I feel often what I'll hear before the patient finally gets to us is maybe some X-rays were done, the X-rays looked okay, and though both legs are numb, the patient's being told maybe it's a single pinched nerve, a sciatica, and the ball just kind of drops, and there's never really a resolution to what happened or how to help the patient or what needs to happen next. And I spend a lot of time with every student that I work with. If you have bilateral rising, both leg, numbness, weakness, please think of the spinal cord.
Yeah.
Like that's the one pearl, the one nugget I hope they take from me is, and not just lumbar spine, but we really have the entire length of the cord to think about. Please think about the spinal cord. And since I have started doing that, I actually had a student reach out a few months ago who found myelitis, spinal cord inflammation in a patient after he heard this similar type of presentation and said, hey, maybe we should look at the spine.
That's awesome.
I was so proud because I feel like this happens more than once in a while.
Well, things like that are the things that make a massive difference. You get somebody who can figure out a spine case early. That's where you can really help somebody from an otherwise potentially ugly fate.
And there's a couple of conditions that love to bother the spinal cord. We mostly focus in multiple sclerosis, but it's certainly not the only one. And we'll definitely dedicate, I think, some episodes to some of the MS mimics. I think that could be really fun.
Yeah, good call.
But in the meantime, tell me about MS. What is MS? How do people think about it?
So MS is something where there is a lot of information that is not great, and it's not the fault of where the information is. It's sort of a fault of how variable this condition is.
Yeah.
So MS starts off as a problem with your immune system. Your immune system is made up of very powerful cells that can cause a lot of damage, but most of the time they're damaging something in your favor. So they're attacking a virus or a bacteria or a growing tumor cell or something like that. Autoimmune conditions are the term that we use for where your immune system attacks something in your body, usually mistakenly. So there are thousands of those. This is lupus, this is rheumatoid arthritis, this is most, poison ivy rashes, all kinds of stuff. But in MS, it is your immune system attacking cells on your brain, in your brain or spine, in the central nervous system called the myelin. So it leads to what we call demyelination, and that is as technical as I want to get with it, because that is not how I think about MS. It is something that we all, we talk about. Say, well, patients will tell me, yeah, I know that there's demyelination, but then I ask them, well, what is that? And they're like, I don't know what that means. And honestly, it doesn't really mean much to me either. So the way I think about MS, if you imagine your brain and spine, kind of like it's this giant office tower where all the decisions for your body get made. And there are millions of offices that are all do different things. Like one's in charge of squeezing your right hand, and one's in charge of sensing cold on your left thumb, and one's in charge of recognizing the color blue or whatever. And there's millions of different offices that are all doing different things. MS is kind of like saying the building is prone to fires. A fire shows up and causes damage. Depending on what office it happens to hit, you might get a symptom. So you might get weakness in your hand, you might get numbness in your thumb, but you might not. And you actually usually don't. You usually don't, because your brain is awesome at what it does. So if there's a fire in the office that squeezes your right hand, your brain will take that job and move it to another office. And that means that someone might have a little bit of weakness for a period of time that goes away, or more commonly, they will never have any symptoms whatsoever because their brain is so good and so efficient at doing that. So the fire happens and nobody knows, except not all these offices are created equal. And if you happen to have fires in certain offices, you might not be able to easily move that job somewhere else, and that leads to a symptom. And that symptom you might not be able to recover from completely. You might be able to recover 50% or 20% or not at all, but that is often the time that we can make the diagnosis. So one of these fires might be, for example, one of the fires that happens in the spinal cord that causes somebody to have numbness in both of their feet, because it's in the office that senses those 2 feet or is getting information from those 2 feet. So that clues us in that might be what we're dealing with. So MS is one of the most variable conditions that you can possibly imagine. It's probably the most variable condition in medicine. You have people with MS that you would never know it. They live their whole lives and have no problems.
I think that's why I like it so much, though. It's for the same thing. It's never the same thing.
It is.
It's so different to each person, how their journey has evolved. It's every conversation is different with every 30 minutes with every patient. What we're focusing on. It's always a change up, and it never gets old.
That is, it's sort of cliche to say that, but you're right. It is something that making everything different, changing it up. There's always different things you got to think about and got to do. It does make it sort of more.
It's never monotonous.
Never monotonous.
If I just did the same thing all day, every day, I don't know that I would be getting better. But I'm always pushed because I'm presented with different problems every day.
That is a great perspective. So the reason that people are all different, there's a few reasons that this presents so differently, where some people have no problems, some people have horrible problems. And part of it is luck, because some people, fires show up and hit the more critical offices. Some people, the fires show up and don't. The brain can move those jobs around. But luck is not really the biggest factor. The bigger factor is how frequently the fires are happening and how big they are when they happen. So if I were to have 2 buildings and say they're both prone to fires, what's going to happen to them in 5 years or 10 years? You wouldn't be able to. I need more information. What does that mean? Well, if I said one of the buildings tends to have fires on average like once every 10 years, and when it happens, it's sort of isolated to one wall, and then it goes out, and that's prone to fires. That is multiple sclerosis. But the other building has fires that show up on average once every 5 weeks. And when they happen, it rips through a corridor. Same disease, also multiple sclerosis. Huge difference between those two people, because that second one, it's only a matter of time before symptoms start to pile up. And you might look at both of them, and neither of them might have any symptoms at the moment, but the risk for the two is dramatically different.
I'll often tell patients too, if you take a picture of that building year by year, with more fire damage comes more just wear and tear on the building, and it'll start to crumble faster.
That is
and we spend a lot of time, I think, talking about how do we really fireproof or fire prevent, these buildings.
Yep.
Once we know someone has MS. So, I agree. Certainly there are sometimes some clues between patients that help us get a sense of how much work is going to be needed to really try to keep this building safe.
Do you get a lot of patients that get confused about relapsing MS versus progressive?
Yes. And also the relapse remitting term. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I feel like the remitting part has fallen away from a lot of literature, and it's been sort of shifted more towards just relapsing MS, because I think that remission term was always really confusing, because patients would say, like, when's my break coming?
Right,
like,
exactly.
When do I get a remission from this? What do and really a remission to me means that there's not fires happening.
Not fires, yeah.
It doesn't mean that there's not been past fire damage or day-to-day symptoms that patients unfortunately still have to deal with.
Exactly.
But yeah, and then I think too the progression part, because sometimes it's hard to measure, and it's not something that you might see day to day. So I'll ask more over longer stretches of time. 6 months ago, last vacation, last summer break, are things different? Are things the same?
Yep.
Is this natural aging? Because, at some point you just can't do a cartwheel anymore, and that may not be the MS. That may just be, age. Yep. Or is it, the MS that's really, kind of smoldering away, or that building sort of crumbling a bit.
Starting to collapse. That point is something that I think makes a difference for people, because when the building, if in some people the building has sustained this damage and we're starting to see part of the building collapse or the whole building collapse, that's a different thing, because hitting that one with a fire hose isn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
It's not the same process anymore.
Yeah.
So when we are treating MS, what we're doing is in large part fire suppression. We are trying to stop new fires from happening. If we do that,
to help preserve that infrastructure,
we get rid of, reduce the risk that it's going to hit one of these critical offices and patient's going to develop a new symptom, which is great and important. But the bigger thing is protecting from that potential, that collapse that happens down the line.
And I think in the future, we hope that there will be reparative therapies.
Yep.
But until we have that, it's really about, I think, at least my practice approach is really to know that we've done everything we could to prevent fires and to protect the building to the best of our ability, because I have no way of fixing it after the fact.
Whenever I talk to patients about that and talk to them about the medication, they're like, this medication is not going to make me better. It's not going to fix the damage. And that's when my heart sinks. But
yes, but we'd focus on the insurance policy aspect.
Yes.
That it's an insurance policy to guard against more fires and to try to preserve the best quality of life possible.
Having said that, especially when we're able to stop fires before they're happening, that is the best.
Yes.
That's why.
Yeah, I think I can just think of so many cases where, I was so lucky to have them come in front of me, and we just found the right drug, and we just, calmed that brain down. I had this one case, and, at his worst, he was able to walk about 20 feet with a walker and had horrible inflammatory brain disease. And, we are able to turn it around, and he is doing so well nowadays. Being able to catch him right at the peak of just a forest fire, and it was awesome.
Not every day you get those times where you get to sort of skip out of the office because something went that way. But it's amazing.
I felt like that day I did something. Like that day I was good, and I helped a person. And now we take a photo once a year together. And obviously, like, he has not aged a bit. He looks great. But I look older every year, but yeah, we now take photos once a year just to commemorate our journey together, even, through this.
That's the reason we do this stuff, Jeans.
I know.
So what are we doing? So how are we stopping fires for people?
So really early diagnosis and early initiation of treatments. So there's a lot of what we call disease-modifying therapies or MS treatments, MS medicines. And these are all designed primarily to reduce fires, and some look at other metrics like delaying or slowing disability, trying to improve disability, trying to preserve speed on fun brain games and walking speeds and sort of all these other metrics. But at their heart, they're really trying to help hold on to brain volume and reduce relapses. Yep. And there's a lot on the market nowadays. We started with medicines in the 80s and 90s that used to be available through a lottery system. And if you were lucky enough to get it, the first time I heard lottery, I'm like, oh, what?
Yeah, exactly. So what's crazy about that is that with the 90s when the first drug came out, that's not that long ago.
No.
And that's pretty meaningful because a lot of times people will look at information they can find on the internet or somewhere about what happens with people with MS. And that might lead people down in sort of a dark hole because the possibilities are endless. Mm-hmm. MS is a list of any symptom a human could possibly have could happen because the brain mm-hmm. controls everything.
Yep.
So depending on where these fires happen, it could be whatever. But if you look at statistics, you're looking at a lot of statistics for people that did not have treatment mm-hmm. or had no way of stopping these fires, and thus by the way that they're made, they're skewed. You're seeing things worse than they are now.
Yes.
So, but yeah, 93 is it's. I guess it's been.
I really try to communicate that to the patient that the patient you imagine in the waiting room is not the patient in the next waiting room.
Right.
That they're looking at the result of time without treatment, that we have natural history studies that show what the outcomes are without treatment, and that we're fortunate nowadays to have so many wonderful therapeutic options to offer that usually I can find something that patients can tolerate, works for their pocketbook, works for their day-to-day routine, and works for the MS. And that's a wonderful thing to have.
Yeah. I think treating MS pre-1993 was more of a, hopefully it doesn't go bad and we can try to.
Oh, I think it was a super low bar. Because even then you would say, well, X number of attacks before you finally change to the same thing, but a little bit different. And now I think it's, it's a totally different mindset about tolerability of breakthrough, but even when I was training, the primer they gave me was like, 2 years. Okay. And now you're like, that's not okay at all.
Yeah.
So I think it was also a really low bar for treatment outcomes because there wasn't a lot of therapeutics. Yeah. Now I think we hold disease to a very different standard when we're managing MS.
Yeah. The standard is simple, which is 0.
Yeah. Nothing. Everything's stable. Yeah. Everything's controlled.
No
new issues.
If we're not getting there, then we're going to try. We're going to move to something that we can get there with.
And I always say, looking back, knowing that we took every opportunity we could or access to any therapeutic tool we could to know we did our best, without regret.
Yeah, there's a lot of options now. And I kind of think about 3 big parts of treating MS, one being fire suppression, the disease-modifying therapies that we're talking about, and our goal there is simple, 0 fires. Mm-hmm. The second big part is trying to treat symptoms, whatever those symptoms might be. That part's actually kind of easy.
But not everybody does that. There are some MS centers that they're strict DMT only, and they don't manage any symptoms.
I think those are called lame MS centers.
I like managing the symptoms. That's like some of the crafting of like, how are we really, doing this to the next level?
Well, it's also one of the easier parts, which is what's the thing? What do we have that might help it? Or what can we do that might help it? Let's try it and see. And if it doesn't work, we try something else. Yeah. That part is relatively straightforward. Mm-hmm. And no matter what, if we can't do anything about the fires that are going on, if we can't do anything about the collapse of the building, there's always a way to try to improve quality of life for people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And then that third big part being, what are the changes somebody can make that helps them? What are the lifestyle changes that people can make? And that's something that we as doctors are horrible at talking to people about. I know I have been horrible a lot, and I'm trying to get better at that, but talking to people about the things that they can do to improve their chances.
Yeah, I think that's a important one to hit, but it's hard to sometimes adapt lifestyle because we are all so busy and we dedicate so much of our time to work that when we come home, we often don't have anything left for ourselves, or if our family takes what's left first, and there's not a lot left for self-care.
Yep.
So we do spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do you maximize the self-care, the eating habits, supplements, physical activity, even duty to others. Like we often talk about volunteering or giving back, or nourishing the soul. I talk a lot about nourishing mind, body, soul in treating the MS.
Yeah, there are things that for just about anybody you can say are useful. Exercise, eating well, low stress, good sleep, all those things. But when somebody's dealing with something like MS, they might have a lot less room for error.
Yes.
And thus, it becomes more important. If you're not dealing with something like that, you might be able to get away with, not having the best whatever it is.
Yes.
But
it's a delicate system, that MS body.
Yep. But I think of it as something that's really empowering for people, which is that we can make a difference. You can make a difference. There are things that can do, even little things that can make it. So I think that's
even if you just think about the impact humidity might have on a patient, something as simple as controlling the humidity. If a high humidity decreases how well you feel or move,
what do you mean
something as simple as that.
Tell us about that. What?
So you may have heard or seen in MS, many patients are very sensitive to extremes of heat or humidity. Yeah. I also think the corollary is true, and many patients are sensitive to extreme cold, or they'll kind of stiffen up and not feel as well in extremes.
Absolutely.
So while we talk a lot about heat, and some people are heat lovers and they play volleyball in Florida in the summer, and props to that.
Yep.
But some people are sensitive. And again, I sort of think about it as it's a delicate ecosystem.
Yep.
And if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if it's too wet, if it's a Tuesday in May, if it's too stressed out, it's going to be a little fritzy.
Yep.
And symptoms may shine through,
I always think about MS symptoms and imagine like boulders in a lake. Like you might see some of them, you might not see them, but the level of the lake is not always the same.
Mm-hmm.
It goes up, it goes down. And when that level drops, now those symptoms start to come out. And that can shock a lot of people, because someone might have had a symptom from MS that happened 15 years ago. Yep. They haven't had to deal with, but now all of a sudden they get the flu, or they get COVID, or they are in high heat and humidity, and their feet go numb again.
Yes. Or
their hand gets weak again. And that raises the concern, is this a new fire? Is this a new flare? But those symptoms that are there are things that can come and go, and there's a lot of factors that can drop that lake level or raise the lake level. So trying to avoid those is something that people can do that helps a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Oftentimes when that happens, I'll call that a recrudescence.
Recrudescence. That's such a good word.
If you've heard that term, or if your doctor has mentioned that term, I think of that as a recrudescence, or old symptoms shining through because something else is stirring the pot.
By the way, about 93% of the trick of being a doctor is having big words that make us sound smarter than we really are. It's our favorite thing to do.
I got a good one for you.
What?
Dysdiadochokinesia.
Oh, man, that's great.
Sounds so good.
It does sound good. I don't have any of that.
We should have a word of the podcast. Like a long, weird word for each one.
Let's do that one. Okay. Dysdiadochokinesia.
Mm-hmm.
Can you spell it?
Can I have a pen?
I can say it. Sort of.
We'll have to spend time at some point talking more about the treatments, I think.
Yes, there's
because there's so many exciting developments.
Yeah, and there are medication treatments, there are non-medication treatments. There's lots of things that we can talk about, but that could go on for several episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully everybody learned something today. You liked what you heard, and you want to hear more from us.
We love talking about this stuff, so we are happy to do it. But to any of those that listen and learn, thank you very much.
Yeah, Have a wonderful day.